Your client is a major US eyeglass company that's considering entering the disposable contact lens market and has asked for your advice. How would you go about solving this problem? And what things would you need to know or consider?
Sounds good. Do you mind if I take 30, 60 seconds just to lay out a framework?
Go for it.
All right. And just so I'm clear, this is I think you said this, but this is a general eyeglass company
Hmm.
thinking of entering contact lenses. Okay. And
Hmm.
and to confirm,
Yeah.
they haven't made or manufactured contact lenses before, or have they
Mm-mm.
made them and just not entered certain markets?
They haven't considered entering this
Okay.
market until.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Mhm.
Okay. I think in that case, uh, overall, there's a couple main factors I'd want to consider, especially in light of that last question that I asked you. So
Mhm.
the first thing I think any market entry analysis has to start with, like, how big is this market?
Mhm.
Um, is this a $100 million market, a $10 billion market? Order of magnitude, I think, is really important here.
Mhm.
Um, Secondly, like, what is the nature of second, like, categories like competition, I
Mhm.
would say. So, like,
Okay.
are there big players? Is this a fractured market? Is this an oligopoly? Like, what is the actual,
Mhm.
like, structure of the existing market? And can we actually win in this market and capture a sizable share to have a real business?
Mhm.
Um, Third, I would say, is there, is there, like, operational capabilities here? Like, can we leverage existing supply chains that we have? Do we have people who, in the eyeglass space already can leverage that experience and generalize it to contact lenses? Or is there something unique about manufacturing, selling contact lenses that is over and above the expertise that we currently have in house?
Mhm.
And how would we acquire that experience if we needed it? Um, I think the last piece is probably the most obvious, but
Mhm.
then it's just like, what is the profit?
Mhm.
What's the character of profit making here? So, is this a business which mirrors the eyeglass business? No pun intended.
Mhm.
In the sense that uh, we can operate in a similar way. Like, let's just say this is a high margin business. I don't know per se, but, like, my hypothesis is this decent margin business, having worn
Mhm.
contacts for 10 years. I paid way too much for them. Um,
Mhm.
but if eyeglasses in general are high margin, and we understand, like, it has a a similar supply chain, like, this could be something where we also add a significant profit figure to our bottom line, and could prove
Mhm.
really meaningful. If the cost structures are different, something else to investigate. But bottom line is, we need to assess profitability. So my four main pieces of analysis here are: what's the overall size of the market, what's the competitive dynamics look like, and then profitability and our operational expertise.
Mhm. Great. Yeah. Which of those buckets do you think is actually most important?
Market entry. Uh, well, first, maybe, I mean, they're all pretty important. I would say the one that strikes me as the one to look at first, though, is just like, is this a big enough market? Do we even want to go here? We've got a viable
Yeah.
business. If the market itself doesn't prove substantial, that can rule this case or this analysis out at the onset. So that's the first place I'd look.
Cool. I agree with you. Let's start with the market size. So, how would you approach that question of figuring out the size of the disposable contact lens market in the US?
Just in the US, yeah.
Hmm.
I think, at first glance, like, I guess, just from simplicity's sake, my first segmentation, like, that comes to mind is something like geography. But I don't see why anyone would be more or less prone to buying
Hmm.
contact lenses if they live in New York versus LA, or
Hmm.
Texas. So I I think, when I think about people who are more likely to wear contact lenses, it's probably similar to eyewear in some respects, in the sense that, like, your most likely customers are going to be people who have
Hmm.
vision problems, or yeah, like, honestly, vision problems, and those folks are more likely to be those who are older, in
Hmm.
general. So they develop everything from cataracts to just have generally
Yeah.
deteriorating vision. And then I honestly think also people who are younger, potentially, who are have undiagnosed conditions like astigmatism, things like that, and have yet
Hmm.
to acquire this. So I think age, what I'm going to get at is age feels like a good
Cool.
segmentation. Um, and I know the population of the US is something like 320 million. And
Hmm.
so I think you could probably, and just for simplicity's sake, I know it's probably a little bit bigger, but like I
Hmm.
think like you could separate the life expectancy is around 80, right? So
Yep.
if you just broke it down, and maybe this is a little bit crude, and correct me if there's anything that's wrong on a very simplistic high level, but something like a 0 to 20, 20 to 40, 40 to 60, 60 to 80. The
Yeah.
reason I'm segmenting it this way again is I think we could probably create an arc of vision problem and say that certain people are more likely to buy and buy in higher volume, let's say if they're
Hmm.
older in general. Um, and I think I don't know the age breakdown of each segment, but for simplicity's sake, I think it's worth assuming that each of those segments is around 80 million. I'm sure
Hmm.
it's true that the middle of the population is slightly larger, but for simplicity's sake, I
Hmm.
think 80 million people per those four buckets makes sense. And then probably in order to size this a little bit more accurately, you need to assign some sort of fraction that is
Hmm.
the percentage of those who potentially have a vision problem and need
Yeah.
corrective lenses of some kind. And that this could be exact. We could probably in reality, like my question, if I were doing this case in a and I had access to client data, I would look at the eyewear numbers that we have and probably
Hmm.
leverage those. So let's
Hmm.
say like 20, 40, 60, 80% across those four groups, meaning like only a little less than a quarter of people who are 0 to 20 have a vision problem. 80% of
Yeah.
people who are older or senior citizens would have something like a vision problem. Um, I think in terms of like contact wears though versus like glasses, I feel like people who are older could care less about. But it's probably a lot more inconvenient for them to put in a lens every day versus
Uh-huh.
just wearing glasses. Like if I was 68, I would
Yeah.
just wear glasses. I'm not on TV
Yeah.
every day talking. Like I'm maybe raising my grandkids or I'm retiring from my job, things like that. Whereas if I'm a teenager, like I care a lot about my appearance and stuff. And so maybe I'm more likely to wear contact lenses and not glasses. Maybe a little bit far afield, but point is, I think the relationship between percentage of people who are going to wear these in each age group is inverted relative to the percentage of people who have problems.
Hmm.
Um, and so I think something like an 80, 60, 40, 20, in terms of the percentage that would be open to wearing contacts is
Okay.
probably a good assignment for each of those four buckets going from
Yeah.
age 0 up to age 80.
Okay.
Um, and so I'd probably use those percentages, the percentages being the X% with poor vision and then the
Yeah.
Y% of people that wear actual contacts, and multiply those out against the 80 million per bucket to figure out
Hmm.
what percent approximately are going to wear contacts. And when I think about those numbers, it comes out somewhere between like 40 and 60 million. I'm doing this a little bit off the cuff, and maybe this is a little bit too coarse,
Hmm.
but I don't necessarily think it's as relevant just because we're making up numbers here in some respects.
Hmm.
To go like, oh, 20 times, I can
Yeah.
do 20 times 80 is right. Like, so I think
Uh-huh.
around 50 million probably feels like a good number in terms of the market
Yeah.
size of the amount of people that I think might
Yeah.
wear lenses. And then I think that the number where the two numbers we're still missing here are A, how much are we charging for
Yeah.
lenses? And then how many lenses are people going to wear each year?
Okay.
I don't want to necessarily go yet into a sub segmentation, which is like there are daily wearers, and then there are people who wear contacts like once a month, which is actually those are definitely two different use cases. Like I actually transitioned to dailies at one point because of like eye irritation or whatever. But barring that, I'd want to know like what's the average purchasing of contact lenses,
Hmm.
and then what's the average price of lenses.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't really have any idea. Honestly, I'm curious if
Yeah.
you have any data on this, but I don't have a clue.
Hmm.
Even as someone who used to frequently wear them, like what they cost because they were covered by insurance when I was wearing them. Um,
Hmm.
so this is where my initial market sizing, I guess, pauses. Um, but overall, 50 million potential people,
Yeah.
and it's probably a couple bucks per contact lens,
Yeah.
and you probably need at least one pair a month for this to be viable. So those are my general takes on market sizing.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I agree with you that 50 million is reasonable. However, I will not require you to go through all the calculations, but I do want some more rationale as to how you got around there. So you started with the whole population. You
Yeah.
talked about like this cascading 80%, 40%, or 80, 60, 40, 20. Tell me how you got to the 50.
Yeah, sure. So high level, let's just start. I think maybe it's easier to just walk through one bucket and then
Yeah.
just
Sounds
it's
good.
rinsing. The way I did it in my head was just like rinse repeat logic over each of those four segments that we outlined,
Hmm.
age groups. So I would say we have like for the 0 to 20 age group, you have like 80 million people. Then you have let's say 20% of those,
Yeah.
with poor vision, which gets you to around 16 million,
Hmm.
16 million people, and then about 80% of those wear contacts. And
Yeah.
so 4 out of 5, like that's like 12 million or so. So I
Cool.
think that's what I did. And then I added those four segments up and got to
Okay.
something like 50 million. I didn't do that same calculation, but I was looking at very similar numbers and figured that those
Mhm.
buckets would all be relatively similar sized.
Cool. Okay. That makes sense. Can you do a little bit of sense check work on that number and tell me if you like
Yeah,
I
sure.
think it sounds reasonable, but how could you know?
Yeah. Yeah. 50 million people, one out of 6 or 7 people in
Hmm.
the US. That's a rather that feels like a pretty large market. And I think one where if we're able to generate reasonable margins, could be extremely lucrative.
Hmm.
So I again I'm making some assumptions that this is a relatively high margin business. I still need to assess that in
Hmm.
terms of profitability, but this feels like a large market. And after doing an initial market sizing, I'm more attracted
Hmm.
to the decision to potentially think about expanding into contact wear.
Cool. Sounds good. I agree. So to talk about what you were just bringing up
Hmm.
before we took a step back, we do have a couple pieces of information that will help you think about the dollar market size. So
Hmm.
we want to size the market and assume that people wear contacts for 2 weeks and then they
Hmm.
change the contact lenses, and that each pair of those contacts costs $5.
Hmm. Can you say that first part again? So
Hmm.
two.
Yeah.
Okay, so $5 per
People, yeah,
contact, but yeah.
$5 per pair of contacts,
Hmm.
and that they wear they're like 2 week contacts. So you can wear the same contacts for 2 weeks, and then you need to change to a new pair.
Okay, so that gives you around 52 weeks in a year. That gives you like 26 pairs a year on average. And we're
Yeah,
just assuming
exactly.
for simplicity's sake that that's the average across all of those segments, like on
Yeah.
aggregate.
They're all buying the same 2 week lenses at the same price, just for
Okay.
simplicity.
Okay, so we've got our 50 million population number. We've got $5 per pair of contacts. So that gets you to 200 a $250 million market. And then if you multiply that number by 25 pairs per
Hmm.
year, seems like you're getting to a number a bit north of 5 billion
Hmm.
for the total market. I mean, 25, what is 25 squared? Like 525, something like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
So I'm just like, it's like 5.25 billion
Yeah.
in terms of the total market size. That's a pretty huge market. I would definitely push us to understand how much, uh, first off, I need a little bit clearer of a picture in terms of our capability building to actually execute on this.
Hmm.
But I also truly need I think a deeper picture of the competition here, because 5.25 billion is a large market and that's exciting. But I don't understand yet in terms of how much of a margin we can take from this per sale, let's say. And then I'm
Hmm.
still unclear in terms of how much of that market we can actually capture. So those would probably be the areas I'd want to dig into next. But overall, it seems like a sizable market.
Hmm. Cool. Yeah. I just want to make sure we get to the exact number here. Can you redo the calculation of the 250 million times the 25?
Yeah, okay, let me do that again.
And you were close. I just want to make sure we get it right.
And we're assuming that 50 million number is right, yeah?
Yeah. So we did the 50 million times the $5, and you got 250 mil, and then
Mm-hmm.
that was multiplied by 25 pairs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually, sorry. Five 25 squared is 625, not 525. So I would
Mhm.
say a little over 6 billion. That's right.
Yeah. Cool.
Understood.
Does that
Yep.
change any of the way you're thinking about it or
It
not
does.
really?
It doesn't.
Okay.
It's a little bit immaterial. It's nice, I would say.
Cool. Okay, great. I'm just curious off the top of your head, if we were to have sized this market in terms of 6-week lenses, if we assume that everyone was wearing these lenses for 6 weeks instead of 2 weeks, but they cost the same amount, the price was the same.
I mean, it'd be a $2 billion market, so I'd be a
Yeah.
lot less excited about it.
Yeah. Cool. How did you get
Still,
to 2 billion?
I just I just divided that. I just divided that by three. I
Hmm.
just divided our
Yeah,
number
I
by
just
three
want
because we're 6 to 2.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah. But that's, I mean, if well, I think the reality, maybe the reality is probably somewhere in between, in the
Mm,
sense that there's a combination, like we were mentioning earlier, just like there's a
yeah.
combination of dailies, a combination of 2 week, 6 week, etc. And there's
Right.
always a percentage of your lenses that you just sort of throw out because your hands were dirty when you touched them, or what
Right.
have you. So something else to bake in.
Cool. Okay, great. So let's let's think about that, so we'll keep it at the $6 billion market size that we originally had, but I agree with your thinking that there's some variance in it depending on the type of lens and whatnot. So
Mhm.
the VP of sales has asked you to think through some of the various levers you might need to pull should you enter the contact lens market and the new business isn't performing as you might have expected. So what might you suggest in that situation to improve the profitability?
Mm. Um, okay, to be clear, the scenario itself
Yeah.
is we have already entered this market,
Hmm.
and we're just trying to imagine, like, if things aren't going as planned, like what would we try to do?
Yeah.
Um, I think off the top, I would first want to analyze our price. It seems like the
Hmm.
most
Mm.
straightforward lever. And price is not something that lives independently from your competition. And so
Mm.
when we are analyzing that, I'd really want to dig into, okay, are we pricing ourselves as a premium contact? Are we pricing ourselves as yet another player in the space? And we're trying to undercut them.
Hmm.
And so if let's say the latter, I would advise us potentially to drop our price further or consider it,
Mm.
and try to command more volume and perhaps take a smaller margin, but
Hmm.
the overall size of the pie would grow potentially significantly.
Yep.
Um, if we feel like we don't necessarily have to do that, and we feel like we're a somewhat differentiated brand, let's say an expert eyewear player, and we only sell premium eyewear, maybe we will also become the premium contact player and brand ourselves as more comfortable, etc.,
Mm.
and actually raise our price and price ourselves more like a fine wine. So I
Yeah.
think that might be so price in general, potentially a really useful lever. Um, Naturally as well, I would dig into every element of our supply chain and see where we can
Mm.
cut costs. So are we producing these things in the most efficient way possible? Are there other elements of our own supply chain that we can further leverage that exist in the eyewear market? This is another piece I'd want to look at. Third, I touched on it, but I think like brand awareness is always something you can look at. So are we like
Hmm.
properly advertising?
Yeah.
If we are using kind of old school channels, is there a way for us to like? I've seen a number of advertisements. In the handful of times I've logged on to TikTok, I've seen stuff like that come up. I feel like embedding eyewear into videos can't hurt, or figuring out alternative channels to do this might be useful. Um, there might also be opportunities to, in a fourth bucket, like just change how we package our offerings. So maybe like,
Mm.
can we bundle this with other things? Is there, a time and place for contacts versus glasses? Can you buy like, a combination of both? Like I think a lot of people who have prescription contacts, they wear them for certain occasions, and then they have their glasses, let's say, for reading at night or something when your eyes are drier. So might maybe an opportunity there. But those are probably the first. I guess the last thing I would consider actually is like
Hmm.
I mentioned it a little bit, but like if there are multiple types of products that we could offer, so like a lens for sporting,
Yeah.
a lens for just
Mm.
relaxation at the beach, a lens for whatever. Like I think
Yeah.
there might be like opportunities to actually rebrand our products and create separate product lines to make our offer more differentiated. But those are the main categories I would
Yeah.
think about in terms of like what leverage we could pull in a situation where things aren't going as expected.
Yeah, that's a great list of ideas. I especially the first one where I really liked how you tied together the price and the way that we're positioned in the market. You know, who do we want to be? What part of the market do we want to play in, and how that relates to competition. So I
Mhm.
appreciated that. Uh, Look, I think we've learned a lot today, and I think you've got uncovered some good information. Do you think that this is a good idea? Should the client enter this market?
Yeah. It's tough to say at a high
Hmm.
level. I
Hmm.
based purely, and we also, like, the last piece here was hypothetically going through a scenario um
Yeah.
where there, things aren't going well. But overall, actually, I'm encouraged. I would say we
Mm,
should enter this market, and the reasons are as follows. The first is big market. Um
mm,
and when we're thinking about, like, what types of markets to enter, all else equal, yeah, a $6 billion market is something we should 100% look
mm,
into. So I'm excited at the prospect there. Um, Part two is there are always questions around operationalizing, capability building. Like, can we actually execute on this? But if we're entering a new market and we're already in the eyewear world and we're a major player, that strikes me as
mm.
a really, there's a lot of synergy there. It's not
Yeah.
like you already understand a lot of the problems from a technical
Yeah.
sense, and contacts have been made before. This isn't reinventing the wheel, and I think it's something that strikes me as operationally possible. Third, now that I think more about it, the exercise we just went through of what levers can we pull, um, actually encourages me because, while things very well may not go as expected, there are quite a few levers we can pull. And so having a pretty well developed arsenal of things that we can go to, even in
Yeah.
the downside scenario, I think, maybe counterintuitively raises the optimism a little bit further. So I would be very open to this.
Mm,
I think some things to think about naturally are,
yeah.
number one, competition. Like just the major risks to highlight here. Like, are we walking into a business that is dominated by a handful of players?
Yeah.
Are there well-defined product offerings already? Is it easy to differentiate ourselves from everyone else out there?
Hmm.
These strike me as like the fundamental challenges.
Yeah.
And then naturally, if this, when you actually think about what a contact is, it's a super delicate instrument. Glasses are delicate too, but it's not something that sits on your physical eye. This is
Yeah.
something that requires a lot of precision and engineering, from literally adapting your vision,
Yeah.
to being comfortable enough to wear every day. So it's a very precise manufacturing operation. And so the last risk I would say is not not underestimating the challenge of creating such a precise piece of
Hmm.
technology that has to be worn by an end user. Overall, I would
Yeah.
recommend going in, but keeping those risks front and center.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, the risks are real. I appreciate you calling them out. What would you tell the client, if you assume that this was the end of the engagement, you gave this recommendation, what should they do in the coming weeks to verify whether this is actually the right thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, deeply researching the competition, doing expert calls,
Yeah.
customer calls, figuring out, like, who are the name brands in the industry, what do they do well, what opportunities exist and gaps that we can fill, that they're currently not addressing.
Hmm.
And then I think as well, like, getting a really direct landscape, like in a related way, but like understanding the products that exist already,
Hmm.
and which ones resonate the most with customers and which value propositions might be open, for us to claim. So
Hmm.
those are the main things I would immediately start on. I would also, like, try to understand what the actual operational setup task is here and how much that type of thing costs. So
Yeah.
before we get all excited about, like, oh man, there's like a huge market for sportswear contacts. Like,
Yeah.
can we build it? Those are the main things I'd immediately get our team on.
Great. Makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right, and now on to feedback. Yep.
Yep.